For almost 3 decades, from the 1970s through the 1990s, the toy industry had the formula down for successful toy lines. Create a world with action figures, vehicles, and playsets. This was almost universally true for 30 years, from Mego's Planet of the Apes in 1974 to that final umpteenth re-release of the Kenner Batcave playset in 2005. However, in the midst of this King Midas age of action figures, when almost anything using that formula could turn to gold, there was one toy line that found itself with a unique challenge. The launch of Transformers in 1984 created an entirely new toy phenomenon for Western world children. These were metal robots that were not designed to scale with any action figures, nor were they conventional action figures in their own right, as they turned from robots into the vehicles that would normally be sold separately alongside the figures, so kids could have interactivity between the characters and the hardware. However, if the figure turns into its own vehicle, what's the figure doing?
Playing with myself.
So we have character toys that aren't action figures that transform into their own vehicles and then aren't compatible with any other action figures in the marketplace. Granted, Transformers hardliners will insist these 1984 metal robots with barely any posability are action figures, but that's a debate for a different video. Point is, they are their own vehicles, and by that rationale, it should come as no surprise Transformers as a toy range was not prioritized for playsets by Hasbro. The same fanboys of this franchise will insist up and down that characters like Metroplex, Omega Supreme, and Fortress Maximus are playsets, because they transform into cities. However, these cities are totally out of scale with the other Transformers in the line. Optimus Prime and Wheeljack couldn't transform and drive around on Fortress Maximus. In essence, Transformers fandom needs to pick a lane. They insist transforming robot characters are action figures, and that some of these action figures are playsets for other action figures. They've changed the definition of a playset from purpose-built interactivity to simply multiple figures dogpiling another figure. By that twisted logic, under specific conditions, Scarlet is a playset. I'm sure by now some Transformers fans watching are yelling about that one mail-away cardboard playset in the fan club sometime around 1985 and 86 that was known as the Transformers Control Center, the STARS Activity Center, STARS standing for Secret Transformers Autobot Rescue Squad, and sometimes casually referred to unofficially as Teletran 1 by fans. Then there's the Japanese version of the playset that was totally different and called the Command Center. But is this really a playset or a cheap diorama? Well, according to the fans themselves via the Transformers Teletran 1 wiki, only the Japanese version is considered a playset in its intent, while the version presented to the rest of the world at the time is seen as a role-play center, whatever the heck that means. What I don't see in that explanation is anything calling it a playset for the characters. And with the price of this thing secondhand these days compared with its rarity, its tiny size, and the fact it was never at mass retail, I think it's safe to say at this point there was only one official Transformers playset ever offered to children in the 1980s. Now, what I'm about to discuss I distinctly remember from toy stores and toy catalogs at the time, even though I never owned it myself, since Transformers and I had a tough breakup early on. Funnily enough, though, a lot of lifelong Transformers fans I've mentioned this playset to have never heard of it, very likely because it wasn't made by Hasbro. While it was an officially licensed Transformers product, and while Hasbro was making all kinds of amazing action figure playsets back then for their other toy lines, the task of making a play environment for the Transformers toys was handed to a company called Warren. Warren was known back then for making awkward 3D jigsaw puzzles, and they did them for both Voltron and Transformers. However, with Transformers' immense popularity obvious to anyone breathing, it seems Warren decided to take that license a step further and create the Transformers Activity Center? Guys, this is a playset. Cardboard, yes, but a playset by any measure. Why the mail-away diorama and this massive beast were both slapped with the label Activity Center baffles me. Is there something about the Transformers brand that calls to mind images of macaroni art and stencil drawing? This thing is almost 3 Optimi high with no role-playing features like that carry handle on the Star's control center. And it isn't portable. Once you build it, you pretty much have to leave it where it is, or mostly disassemble it to relocate it. And while this isn't a literal recreation of the ARC headquarters from the first season of the original series, it uses enough visual cues in its artistic liberties to make it, pardon the phrasing, a prime substitute for any kid in the 1980s who wanted a base for their Autobots. Oh, come on! And an Autobot base it specifically is, with the good guys emblem front and center on the outside of this 3-story fortress, incorporating the watchtower on one side and the mountain-like partial stone pyramid wall on the other. It's an imposing home base for your G1 ARC crew. Inside, the playset has all of the visual technology that would allow a child to easily imagine this is Teletran 1 and the Autobots' new home on Earth. Warren even smartly included a ramp to the second level, I suspect, so kids could take advantage of the wheeled G1 Transformers by rolling them down the incline like oversized Hot Wheels. Because it's cardboard, it has a few limitations despite being sturdy in its construction. For one, the watchtower has what looks like it should be an elevator on the interior, but obviously there is no elevator mechanism to utilize. Just 2 additional platforms inside the tower with doorways to access them. On the far side is what appears to be an armory for the Transformers' defensive weapons, but these are printed on with no wall mounts included for the actual figures, weapons, or accessories, which would have been a cool touch. Facing the front of the fort, it's immediately apparent any Decepticons that attack aren't going to have too much of an issue getting inside. 2 massive structural gaps provide easy access to the ground level, so the Autobots are going to have to station guards there at all times. The playset instructions also make mention of a breakaway door at the front of the HQ. This amounts to a pair of flush panels that have no hinge points. They would truly break away when impacted. However, their intricate shape means these would get dented, creased, and begin to split very quickly with a few uses. So on this relatively unharmed example, I'm leaving well enough alone. And that goes for a lot of the tabs on this playset as well, which are very small and fragile, so take great care with assembly and disassembly. The final bit of limitation with this playset is that you must use the bottom lid of the box itself as the main standing platform for the entire experience. The rear marketing graphics on the box are camouflaged with a sheet of printed paper that layers over the lid before the wall pieces are put into their respective slots. It's chintzy, but in the final build it serves its purpose. And if your example, like mine, has any accidental crushing of the outer box, it makes building the playset a far more janky endeavor. All of the positives of this thing existing far outweigh its shortcomings, however. The Autobots desperately needed a playset in 1984. It always felt wrong that such a popular toy line never had a home base. Turns out they did. It just wasn't made by Hasbro, so few people found out about it, and even fewer remembered it years later. You have the computer bays where Wheeljack and Jazz can discuss strategies. You have plenty of space to give Ratchet to repair damaged comrades, and the armory for Ironhide, Cliffjumper, and Brawn to hand out laser guns. And there's more than enough room under the computer level for Optimus, Ratchet, and Ironhide to leave their trailers parked, or as an entire bay for Jetfire to use as a hangar. As someone who is devoted to the 84 ARC crew and the original season bad guys over anything else that came later, I found the Warren playset really completes the world of Season 1 Transformers better than I would have imagined, because this really feels like the original G1 toys' only home. The phrase transform and roll out always meant something to the original Transformers generation, and thanks to Warren, they had something to roll out from.